middle of the night. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second day of Dev Days. My name is Karen Kenzie. I will be your host for the web and mobile track. I'm very excited to be here and hope you have a wonderful day. I'm a senior software engineer and Hodash Dev Meetups Group co-organizer, and I want to welcome you and welcome Elad Shechter. Is a very close friend of mine from Israel. Is a CSS master. Welcome, Elad.
Hi everyone.
Hi. On his spare time, he loves to write blogs about CSS, and you can wake him up in the middle of the night and he will give you a lecture on CSS. He loves to speak in conferences. He is taking the stage all over the world with CSS talk. So enjoy his talk, and don't forget to participate, ask questions on the chat, give feedback, and you have a chance to win a free ebook thanks to our partner, Pact. So be interactive, but most of all, enjoy and be inspired by our speaker and the sessions. We have a great lineup for you. Enjoy.
Let me share my screen. Let's see that everything is working. Okay, I think it is. The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our life in so many ways. Even for me, that I just started to talk in physical conferences in the end of the year of 2019, all the conferences that came after has been canceled. And yes, even Dev Days 2020, if you remember. And in this situation in life, you maybe can be sad, but from my perspective for life, we don't have time to be sad. Life are so short, and because of that, we always need to think about how to create a good situations from a bad ones. And this is exactly what I've done when the coronavirus pandemic has started. In the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, if you remember, we have a lot more time to spend at home. And I was rearranging my apartment in the few days, change everything, move everything, and everything to create a good mood to stay at home. But then came the first weekend that we cannot go out anywhere. And I thought to myself, what I will do with all this free time in the weekend. And I remember that several years ago, I created a pure CSS game, which is called Kill the Birds, that so many web developers all around the world loved it so much. But I thought to myself that in the last several years, I learned so many new tricks in CSS that now I can create a lot better one. But I needed an idea of what it will be about. But it was one of the most easiest idea that I had in my life. Because if we are now living in the coronavirus pandemic time, why not to create the coronavirus game? And this is exactly what I've done. I created this pure CSS game, which is called the Coronavirus Invaders. And everything that you are seeing right now is done only while using CSS and HTML. Yes, for the CSS part, I'm using a CSS preprocessor, and even for the HTML part, I'm using an HTML preprocessor. But all the logic of this game, like when I'm clicking on the My button and it's opening a pop-up, the logic of the opening and the closing of the pop-up is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the game navigation and it will open the game frame itself. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click on some coronavirus creature, they will be disappear and the score of the game will go up. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And what about the countdown? No, really? The countdown is built only while using CSS. But before you're writing any single line of code in your own project, you need to think about something that inspires you. And I don't know why I remember an old Kotlin that I saw in the middle of the year of 2019 with this cute creature that was painted on Canvas HTML, and they remind me a little bit the coronavirus creature. And I needed to think about a name for the game and how to design the main navigation, and I don't know why I had in my mind the chicken invader games in my head. And I took the invader's word and some other design ideas on how to design the main navigation. And when you are thinking about inspiration, inspiration is always, but always, to take other older ideas and to create from them something else, something new. And the first thing that I wanted to create is to create the coronavirus creature. And as you can see, this is my own coronavirus creature. This is my inspiration, and I love it because this is my creature. And then I started to create the HTML of the coronavirus creature. First, I created a label element with a class of coronavirus, and inside I put an input type radio. And you may ask, why I'm using here label element and why there is input type radio inside? This is part of the logic that we will talk about it little bit later. But all the visual part of the coronavirus creature are starting in this div class body. We have the body, and inside the body we have the 12 hairs of the coronavirus creature and his both eyes. But from the beginning, I saw that I have a lot of repetition in my code, in the HTML part, like to create all those 12 air HTML elements. And in the real game, I have 100 coronavirus creatures. And I didn't want to copy paste them one by one. And I needed to think on a way to solve this problem. And in my first time in my life, I'm using an HTML preprocessor that gives you the possibility to do the repetition part in the HTML in a more smarter way. And yes, for the CSS part, I'm using the CSS preprocessor of SAS that I'm using in the last 12 years. I think for every one of my projects that I created until to now. And now, instead of doing, for example, this repetition, I can write it in Pug. In Pug, we have variables, while loop, and in this way, I can create dynamically all these repetitive parts of the HTML. But as you can see here, Pug is written really different from regular HTML. It's being compiled to regular HTML, but it's written really different. And when you are working with Pug, you cannot write half Pug and half HTML. If you are working in Pug, you need to write everything in Pug, and this means that I need to update all the project to the way that Pug is being written. Nice. But now let's start to talk about all the logic of the game, and let's start to understand first all the frames logic that I have in this game. To understand that, let's take a look again on the game itself. And as you can see here, the first frame is the game menu frame. This is one frame that I need to represent in my HTML document. The second one is when I will click on the how to play button, it will open a pop-up. And yes, we can put frame above other frames. The third frame in the same idea is when I will click on the oh my button, another pop-up, same idea, but this is the third frame that I need to represent in my HTML document. And the last frame that I need to represent in my HTML document is when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the game menu frame and it will open the game frame itself. And this is our last fourth frame that I need to represent in my HTML document. And how I'm representing all those frames in a very easy way, I'm just creating 4 separated section HTML elements. And as you can see by the class name and by the ID name, the first one is the game menu frame. The second one is the game frame itself. The third one is the pop-up of who am I, and the last one is the pop-up of how to play. But when I'm loading this game, I want to see only the game menu frame. I don't want to see all the other frames. How can I hide all the other frames in a very easy way? I'm just giving all the other frames, display none. And in this way, when I'm loading the game, I'm only seeing the game menu frame. But now I need to create some flags that they will tell me if something is open or something is closed. How can I create flags without using any JavaScript? If you are thinking about input of checkboxes, they are like flags. Unchecked, false. Checked, true. And this is exactly what I'm adding in the beginning of the HTML document. I'm adding 3 different checkboxes that every one of them need to do a different operation in the game. Every one of them has its own ID name. For example, this checkbox that this has this ID name of Toggle Game. If it's unchecked, this is mean that I want to see the game menu frame, but to hide the game frame. But if it's checked, I want to do the opposite, to show the game frame, but to hide the game menu frame. The 2 other checkboxes are even more simple to understand. The checkbox that has the ID name of how to play pop-up, if it's unchecked, don't show me the how to play pop-up. And if you are checked, please show me the how to play pop-up. And in the same way, for the third checkbox that has the ID name of who am I pop-up, unchecked, don't show me the who am I pop-up. But if you are checked, please show me the who am I pop-up. But those are just checkboxes that I'm putting in the beginning of the HTML document, opacity of 0, position absolute top minus something. You cannot see them and you cannot click on them. And now we need a way to trigger these specific checkboxes without clicking on them specific. To do that, I'm using a very old feature that exists from the beginning of HTML. The game navigation button that you saw are not created from button element. Instead, I'm using label element that only look like buttons. And label element can trigger any input that you want with the for attribute that can be connected to an ID name of an input. For example, the save the world label button element is being connected with the for attribute to the checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game. You see Toggle Game here, Toggle Game here. And if I will click this label button element, it will trigger this checkbox and it will change its status from unchecked to status of checked. If I will click it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked and as many times that I will clicking on it, okay? The same way for the two other label buttons. For example, if I will click the UMI label button, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name of UMI pop-up. And as many times that I will click it, it will change from unchecked to checked, from checked to unchecked. But this is just changing those statuses of those checkboxes, and there still doesn't do for us any operation. And now, to use those statuses of those checkboxes to do for us some operation, I'm using here two special CSS features. The first feature is the check pseudo class. I can see if there is a specific checkbox that is in a status of checked. And if there is a specific checkbox in status of checked, I can use the sibling selector that can select me any sibling element that come after, and I can give it now display block, display none, and in this way I can show or hide other frames of the game. And this is exactly what I'm doing in the real game. For example, when I'm clicking on the how to play label button element, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name of how to play pop-up, and it will change its status from unchecked to status of checked. And if this now checkbox is in status of checked, this selector will start to work for us. If this checkbox with the status of checked is now checked, it will go to the sibling element that has the ID name of how to play. This is the real pop-up, and I'm just now giving it display block. And now this pop-up is open. But now you need to ask yourself another question. How I'm closing this pop-up? And if you are thinking about it, I'm doing it really in the same idea. The X button and the close button, again, not button element, again, label element that only look like button. And this both button in this specific pop-up, more label button, sorry, have the for attribute that's being connected to the same checkbox. And if I will click the X button and the close button, they will trigger this checkbox and it will change the status from checked to unchecked. This selector will stop to work and we will get the display none that we declared in the beginning. And now the pop-up will be closed. But now you need to ask yourself the third question. What is happening when I will click the save the world button, the play button of the game? When I'm clicking this button, I need to do two operations instead of one. First, I need to hide the game menu frame, and then I need to show the game frame itself. How can I do two operations instead of one? And it's really the same idea if you are thinking about it. When the checkbox with the ID name of Toggle Game is being checked, first I'm going to the sibling element with the class of game menu frame, and I'm giving it display none. After that, I'm going to the another sibling element that has the class name of game frame, and I'm giving it display block. And in this way, I can do as many operations that I want with one status of one checkbox. This way of written is written, of course, with SAS. You can write it in CSS in two separated selector. This will be compiled to two separated CSS selector, but it's a lot more readable to write it and read it, of course, with SAS. Nice. And now let's continue for one of the most amazing tricks that I have in this game. When I'm clicking those coronavirus creatures, they are being disappear and the score of the game is going up. We actually have here two tricks. The first trick is when I'm clicking those coronavirus creature, they need to be disappear. And the second trick, that the score need to go up. Let's talk about these both tricks. Let's start with the first one. If you remember in the beginning, I told you that every coronavirus creature is a label element that has inside input type radio. But I also told you that all the visual part of the coronavirus creature are starting here with this div class body. Inside the body, I have all the elements of the eyes and the hairs inside. But what I'm doing in the real game, I'm doing animation for the label element. I'm telling it to move around the screen with a CSS animation. Because it has all the visual part inside, it will take it with it. And it's also telling you that if you are clicking on the visual part of the coronavirus creature, it's like you are clicking on the label element. And because there is input type radio inside, it will automatically get triggered and it will change its status from unchecked to checked. In this case, you don't even need the for attribute and the ID name, because when there is input inside the label, it will automatically get triggered when you will click on the label element. Then the coronavirus creature is moving, the label is moving. You are clicking on the visual part. It's like you are clicking on the label. It will trigger the input type radio and it will change its status from status of unchecked to status of checked. This status is telling you that the virus is being dead, and now we need to hide the visual part of the virus. To do that, I'm just selecting every input type radio that is in status of checked. Please go to the sibling element with the class of body and give it opacity of 0. You see, you are clicking on this coronavirus creature, you are triggering this radio button, they go to the sibling element with div class of body, and I'm just giving it opacity of 0, and in this way you are clicking those creatures and they are being disappear from the screen. Nice. But now we need to create and to print the total CSS score to the screen. To do that, I'm using a very special CSS feature, the CSS counter feature, and how it really works. In order to it to work properly, it needs to be defined in the HTML part before all the input type radio. The best place for me was to define it on the body HTML element. How I'm defining a CSS counter, I'm just selecting here the body element, and I'm using the special property of counter reset. This is creating me a CSS counter, and I just need to give it a name, and I gave it the name Corona. Now I need to count all those dead viruses. I'm just selecting every input type radio that is in status of checked, counter increment me the Corona counter that I declared here. After that, I need to print the total score to the screen. In order to it to work properly, it needs to be defined after all the input type radio. The easiest place is just to put it in the bottom of the HTML document. I created here the div class sum. The text score is coming from the HTML, and here after, I want to print the total score. To do that, I'm just selecting the class of sum, using the after pseudo element, that using the content property that can get the CSS counter native function. And I'm just now printing inside the corona value that I incremented here and created here. And in this way, you are clicking on those coronavirus creature, it's counting them and printing them immediately to the screen. Because it's a very complicated example, let's see it in a live CodePen example. Let's open this CodePen. And as you can see here, I kind of created 5 coronavirus creature. The label, this div class of body, this is the big black circle. You can even see the input type radio with position absolute that I put it a little bit inside. In the real game, you don't see it because it has opacity of 0. And in the bottom, I have a place to summarize the score, div class sum, the text score is coming from here, from the HTML, and the value is coming from the CSS. And the eyes and the hairs, if you are not, you know where they are here in the HTML part in the real game. But that it will be more easier to understand, I didn't put them in this example. To declare a CSS counter, I'm just selecting the body element, and I created a CSS counter with the property of counter reset, and I gave it the name Corona. For every input type radio that is in status of checked, counter increment with the Corona value that we declared for the CSS counter. Beside of it, if the input type radio is in status of checked, please go to the sibling element with the class of body and give it opacity of 0. You see, if this input type radio will be checked, it will go to this sibling element and it will give it opacity of 0. And now for the last part, I'm just selecting the class of sum, the after pseudo element that will come here with the content property, with native CSS counter function that I'm just putting here the Corona value that I incremented here and created here. Let's see that it really works. Let's click on some coronavirus. You can see the radio button being checked. The CSS score is going up. And in this way, you are creating a pure CSS score for a pure CSS game. Nice, but let's continue to more amazing tricks. The next one, a pure CSS countdown. Let's see it directly in a live CodePen example. Here, as you can see, in the HTML part, I don't have any numbers. Again, they are coming from the CSS, and they are coming from a CSS animation that I'm doing on the content property. But as you can see here, it's only going between 9 to 0. But here, it's going between 99 to 0. What is actually happening here? It's actually two separated strings that I'm doing on them animation. To understand exactly what is happening here, let's print here the text AA. And you will see these both numbers being separated. They are two separated strings that are really synchronized, and only because of that, it's looking like a real countdown. But how it really works, let's reset the animation and let me explain you how. I'm selecting here the class of count, as you can see. For the before pseudo element, this is the first value. I'm calling the animation of countdown, and I'm telling it to work for 100 seconds and one iteration. And if you're thinking about it, 100 second, 10 frame, this means that every 10 seconds will go number down, 20 second another, and so on and so on. After it will finish all the 100 second, I want it to be stuck on the last frame of the animation. To do that, I'm just putting here the special forward value that telling the animation, when you are finished all your iteration, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation. This is for the first value. For the second value, I'm using here the after pseudo element. And I'm calling the same animation, but in a different way. I'm telling it to work for 10 second and 10 iteration. 10 second, 10 frame, this means that every 1 second will go number down, 2 second, another one, and so on and so on. When it will finish the first iteration, it will do it again for another 9 iteration. Why? Because I declared it to work for a total of 10 iteration. And after all of those iteration of the second value, I want it to be stuck again on the 0 value. And to do that, I'm putting here again the forward value that telling the animation, after you finish all your iteration, please be stuck on the last frame of animation of 0. And in this way, when all the 99 seconds will finish, it will be stuck on the 0, 0 value. Nice. Let's continue to our next trick. Random values. First, I wanted to show you why I wanted to create random stuff in my own game, and let's play the game again. As you can see here, the location of the coronavirus creature are really randomized. Even the scale of them is being randomized, and even the rotation of them is being randomized. But wait a minute, how can I create random stuff in CSS? You can, but you can do it with SAS. Because it's a very important example, I wanted to show it first in the real code of the game. And you need to understand, if I created a different animation for every one of the viruses, this means that I needed to create 100 different CSS animation. And because I didn't want to create them one by one, what have I done here? I used SAS for loop that is running 100 iteration and created me dynamically 100 different keyframes. And every one of the viruses have a different animation. Every one of the viruses has 6 different locations in the game. The translate X is always the same, but the translate Y, I'm using here the SAS random function, and in this case, it randomized me a value between 1 to 80, and I'm just doubling it in 1VH. Even for the scale, I'm using the SAS random function, and even for the rotation, I'm using here the SAS random function. Because I want you to understand it exactly how it really works, I will show you another more easier example to understand. Let's compile here the HTML that you won't be afraid from it. Just regular HTML, nothing special. 6 empty li HTML element that I gave him some style to be big black circles. But the values that you're seeing inside of them is not coming from the HTML. Again, it's coming from the CSS. And in the SAS code, what I'm doing, I have here a SAS for loop that's running 6 iteration. You see amount of value is 6, and then this for loop is running 6 iteration. And dynamically create me the CSS selector between class 1 to class 6. And in every one of the iteration, in the before pseudo element, in the content property, inside the string, I'm using here the SAS random function that randomizes me a value between 1 to 80 and just doubling it in 1VH. And all those values that you're seeing right now are randomized. For you to believe me that they're really randomized, the only thing that I need to do that they will change is to compile the SAS code again to CSS. To do that, I will just press here enter. And let's press enter and let's see that they're changing. And if I will do it again, they will change again and again and again. And that you won't be afraid from this. This is being compiled to regular CSS. Browser cannot read SAS. And how it's look after it's being compiled? Just regular CSS, nothing special. Nice. But let's continue to our next trick. In the end of the game, I'm putting a game over curtain after 99 seconds, and I wanted to create the effect that the player can play this game again and again. But I had a problem. I understood that I need to reset all the checkboxes that was checked to unchecked. And to reset the CSS score, I need to reset all the radio button that was checked to unchecked. And I thought about a lot of ways that I can do it. But the best way that I found is that the back to main menu button, it's not a label element in this case. In this case, I'm using a very special input, an input type reset. You can use button type reset, input type reset, it's the same. And the only thing that left for me now to do is just to wrap every part of my project with a form element. And now you click on this input type reset button, it will automatically reset you all the checkboxes that was checked to unchecked. This will bring you automatically to the game menu navigation. It will automatically reset all the radio button that was checked to unchecked, and this will automatically reset the CSS score to 0. And now you can play this game again and again and again. And the last question that you need to ask yourself, how can I know exactly when to put this game over curtain? And this is one of the most easiest tricks that I have in this game. Everyone know that animation duration, telling the animation after how much time it needs to take from the start until the end. But what we are forgetting that we have another animation duration, the animation delay duration. This is telling the animation, the CSS animation, after how much time it need to be start. And in the real game, it has 99 seconds. In this example, I didn't want that we will need to wait 99 seconds. And I put here only 5 seconds. And let's see that it really works. I will refresh the screen and we will count together between 1 to 5. Okay, let's do it. And let's count together. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Game over. Okay, we saw here a lot of CSS tricks that with them you can create a pure CSS game. And maybe you are thinking that this is the main key takeaway that I want you to take from this talk. It isn't. The most important thing that I want you to take from this talk is to create your own project and only for fun. And why it's so important to create code projects only for fun? Think about it. When you're children, you are playing and you are learning in this way new stuff and you are enjoying what you're doing. Think about in the animal kingdom. Small kittens, they are like playing with each other, hunting each other. And in this way, when they are adults, they know how to hunt. But what we are doing when we are becoming to be adults, what we are doing, starting to learn things in the boring way, in the hard way, we are not enjoying what we are doing. Instead of learning new stuff by playing with code. And what I want you to do, create any project that you want. In CSS, in other stuff, I don't care. In this way, you are enjoying, you're getting to be a lot better web developers. If you are better web developers, in the end, you will get a better salary. And even that isn't important because the most important thing in life is to have fun. Life are so short. Enjoy in every way that you can from them. Before we finish, my friend, I'm Elad Shechter. I'm a CSS HTML architect at Upright. Upright is the open source Firebase alternative. I'm doing a lot of stuff on CSS. The best way to follow me is via my Twitter. You can see all my other stuff in my website. And to see the game, of course, in CodePen. And if you want the slide, take off your smartphone and QR them with a QR code here. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Elad, for an inspiring talk. I hope everyone will get a chance to write their own CSS game now that you explain everything to them. You can write questions in the chat if you have any, or share your ideas of your own CSS game. So we have one question in the chat. It is obviously about pushing the boundaries of the CSS and the challenge to use HTML and CSS only. But have you tried to check how the output of CSS and HTML would be reduced by introducing some JS here and there?
No, I'm a CSS HTML architect, is meaning that I'm practicing in my day job mainly how to create complex architecture with CSS and HTML. Of course, this way to create games is not the best way. Yes, this is only to, as how you say it, to take the boundaries and see how much you can. I didn't check The main idea for me is to create something that doesn't have any JavaScript. And of course, everything is correct. It's better to create real games with JavaScript and not with CSS. Yes, but it's only for fun, and in this way you are learning new stuff. You are learning how to create a complex for loop in SAS, for example, that you can use in the day job that I'm using sometime. This thing you can count with the CSS counter, for example. If you want to put a lot of checkboxes that the user can check them out, and you want to tell them how many checkboxes they checked, you can count them with the CSS with the CSS counter without using any JavaScript. Think about some stuff that it's better to use in CSS and not in JavaScript. Of course, for games, it's not the best way to do it. And I'm using here label element for button, and don't do it in real life because it's incorrect. But play with your imagination. Think about which things that are really good to use in your day-to-day when you are doing some project and web programming.
Maybe this will inspire you to try and take Elad's code and try to introduce JavaScript yourself if you want to, and share it with Elad and
And,
us. It will
and
be great and inspiring way to try it.
and if you are creating pure CSS game, of course, tag me on Twitter. I want to see them.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice.
Give him some time. There is a delay of 20 seconds between they hear us to them.
Yeah,
Uh,
it takes time to type questions. So I want to thank this. Another question.
I told you, we need to give them time.
As a CSS HTML architect, how do you split the responsibilities in front-end project with JavaScript developers?
I'm just separating these ideas. Sometime I can start and to create all the logic of the component part, HTML part separated, with their SAS code that is being separated for every component, and then someone coming in doing the JavaScript. Or maybe it can be in the opposite way, that someone is doing in the JavaScript. He puts, of course, some HTML, but just div and wrapping elements that I'm not after that going and make them all the style, fixing the HTML part that it will be better. I can work in both directions. It depends, of course, who is free first. Free first. And it's like if I don't have time, someone do fix the JavaScript, and then I'm coming doing the CSS. And if I'm free first, then I'm doing the CSS HTML part, and then other web developer is doing the JavaScript.
Any other questions or feedbacks or ideas for pure CSS game? Well, I want to thank you, Elad, for a great session. It was really inspiring. See you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day.